Bear with me. Elly will sound a lot nicer than I do. Welcome everyone, and thank you all for coming. I'm so happy to see so many people out to hear Elly speak. Elly has been coming to Western for a very long time now, many years now. And while this is specifically attached to my history of the Holocaust course, I'm so glad that so many more of you could come and join us tonight. I'm Professor Priestman, for those of you who don't know me, and I teach in the history department here at Western. And so just before we start, I wanted to say that Elly is happy to take questions after his talk, so please stick around for that. And I also wanted to not only thank you all for coming, but thank the Social Science Student Donation Fund and the History Department for making this event happen tonight, as well as my previous TA Magda and my current TA Sarah for helping me with all the preparations. So, and then finally, of course, to Elly himself for coming and sharing his story with us. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pushkin. All right, many of you are history students, right? So who was the founder of your university? Anybody know?
Bishop Isaac Helmut.
Bishop Isaac Helmut, Bishop of Diocese of Huron, founder of Western University of London. And he has got an interesting history behind him. He was born in Poland to a family of a Jewish rabbi, and he studied in the academy for a rabbi, and he graduated. He was entitled to work as a rabbi, but he decided to go to Germany to study further religion, and he ended up in a university in the west of Germany, and there the academians convinced him that there was something to the Christian religion as well. So he converted. His father disowned him. He ran away from home. He took his mother's last name and he came to England. He immediately became professor of Hebrew studies at a university. I think it was in Edinburgh, but I'm not sure. And then he was sent out to Canada, to the colonies. And he came and became the bishop of the Diocese of Huron. By the way, he earned, as a minister, he earned his permission to be a minister of the church, and he came here, and so the rabbi's son created this university here. So we are all grateful, right? Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about history now, before I tell you my own story. The trial of Holocaust deniers. A few years ago, a friend of mine, a German professor of European history, who is now teaching in Scotland, in fact, in charge of the European history department, called me one day and he said, Elly, would you like to come to a conference on war criminals? I said, where? He said, on Lake Como in Italy. I said, yes, I'm going. It's a beautiful place, Lake Como. And he invited me, he says, I'm not happy that they are going to put to trial war criminals from Auschwitz. He says, what are they going to do? These men are now 90-year-old. What are they going to do with them? They will not condemn them to 40 years in jail. He said, I'm suggesting that we should have them come and give the real story, what they did. Let them come to a truth conference. I said, that's an interesting idea. Do you think you could win the city, the country to do that? Well, he says, I'm calling a conference to Lake Como, Villa Vigoni Conference Center, a beautiful center. And he says, we are going to talk. We are going to have historians, and we are going to have legal people, lawyers, professors of law. And we went to Vigoni, Lake Vigoni, a gorgeous place, a villa on that beautiful lake. it was donated by a German-Italian family to the states of Italy and Germany together to have international conferences. A gorgeous place, and the two people there, Dr. Norman Domeier, which is also a friend of mine, I know him, and Professor Dr. Thomas Weber. Weber is the guy that invited me. He's the one on the right here. And there was this beautiful Lake Como, gorgeous gardens, very narrow beds in the building, and the conference. And he sent me a list of the people who are going to attend. And I see, I must tell you, in Germany, if you are with two doctorates, every time you are introduced, you say, this is doctor, doctor. Now, if you happen to be a professor as well, it is doctor, doctor, professor, every time. And your wife is called doctor, doctor, professor, madame, something like that. So I get the whole list, and I see my name is there, and it says Holocaust survivor. I said, hey, take it out. Put in BSc engineering. Give me something. Everybody in the conference had at least a double doctorate, and some of them had 3. Scary. And there is a conference. A beautiful room, instantaneous translation, English, French, English, German, and Italian. You put on your earphones, you can press a button, you can hear any language. And there were all the historians and all the professors of law. And they disagreed vehemently. Most historians, speaking at length, explained why it makes sense to ask those people to come and tell the truth, and we won't send you to jail. We won't prosecute you. And there were the legal people who explained in great detail why this should not be done. The country has to know what is going on. People, new generations should learn, and they learn from a court case. Why don't we go to court? They talked for 3 long days, 4 days and nights, evenings as well. After having a beer, they are still arguing. And I want to ask you, what do you think they decided after 4 days? Could you take a guess? Should they take them to court or not? What do you think?
No decision.
After 4 days, they decided to have another conference. They couldn't agree. They were sitting and talking very strongly in both directions. And quite frankly, I couldn't agree either. I asked them one favor. My contribution was, I ask you one thing. You can ask them to tell the truth, but don't tell them they are forgiven. And they all jumped up and said, no, we are not forgiving them. We are only telling them we won't take them to jail. There was one man there who was not a professor, and his name is Mr. Kirk, chief prosecutor for Nazi crimes in Germany. And then after they all spoke for 2 days, this guy sat quiet. I was waiting to hear, what does he say? He's the guy who is taking them to court. And Mr. Schrim told them, you are wasting your time, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to do what you are saying you want to do, the historians, you would have to change the German constitution. Because you are not allowed to tell a guilty person or a person accused that if you tell the truth, we won't send you to jail. How can you do that? There is no such precedent. Besides, he says, I know those gentlemen. Every Friday they meet at such and so bar in Berlin, and they tell each other the same old lies. They will never give each other away, because if one of them breaks, he would tell about the others. They are not going to tell the truth. For 70 years, they have kept the truth from everybody, and now they will not start speaking to you. And since it is illegal, I'm also going to take them to court. Illegal to do what you are suggesting. So forget it. But they were still arguing. After him, everybody stood up and gave the same arguments all over again. They never had a second conference because Mr. Kurt took them to jail, took them to court. Who were these people? There was this fellow, Oskar Gröning, now 94. He just died yesterday, by the way. The bookkeeper of Auschwitz. The bookkeeper of Auschwitz. He was a young man. He was 21, 22, whatever he was, in 1941 to 1944. He is accused, convicted of, he's not convicted, he was accused of the murder of 300,000 Jews in Auschwitz while he was there. And he defended himself. The judge said, you took a job because you didn't want to go to the front, you wanted to protect yourself. I don't know, nothing helped. He said, I have always told the truth. I gave an interview to the Times of London 12 years ago when I told them what I did, and I told them what happened in Auschwitz, and I always felt guilty about what happened there, but I didn't do it. And the judge asked him, did you serve on the platform when people arrived from Hungary? And he said, yes, I sometimes had to do duty on the platform. And you carried a gun? Yes, I carried a rifle. But I didn't do anything. I was just there doing guard duty. Anyway, he was condemned to 4 years in prison, now confirmed on appeal. There was another one, Reinhold Hanning, 94, served as a guard in Auschwitz. February 2016 in court, accused of murder of 170,000 Jews. How did they calculate it? They say if you served from here to here and during this time they killed that many, you are a contributor to those 170,000 deaths. Was found to be too old, doesn't understand what's going on, which is what we predicted, what the guy Kurt said in talking. He says, these guys, who knows what they'll say, but they are going to court. The court threw them out. He died. Here's another one, Hubert Zafke, 95, medic in Auschwitz. This was a man who worked right at the gas chambers. His job was to push people into the gas chamber before they died. He was there when Anne Frank arrived in Auschwitz. She was later sent out and she died in the other camp. Hubert Zafke was a medical orderly around the gas chambers. Now that is as close to making death, causing death as you could get. He was on duty when Anne Frank arrived, but she didn't go to the gas chamber. Stands accused of killing at least 3,681 people. The precision of it astounds me. There were hundreds of men working there, SS, but they've calculated it precisely. He suffers from dementia. What do you think happened? Nothing. So what happened? I have a short video.
The train stopped. After a while, all of a sudden the doors were opened. They started screaming, the men and boys, into one column.
Thank you.
What happened to my mom and my sister, I don't know, but I've never seen them again, never said goodbye to them. They just disappeared from my life that moment. I feel that I have a responsibility as a survivor to make sure that the Holocaust should not be forgotten. I felt that I must be a witness of the trial.
For maybe one of the last big Holocaust trials opened today in Germany.
Oskar Gröning is charged with more than 300,000 counts of accessory to murder, known as the bookkeeper.
The bookkeeper of Auschwitz.
Gröning's job was to collect the victims' valuables.
Well, he says he did not kill anyone himself. He admitted in court he felt morally guilty.
We were sitting in the courtroom and this frail old man walked in
I thought, you are the same Nazi, the same person who thought you were gods and we were vermin.
The whole Holocaust is one crime. The whole Holocaust is one crime. Everybody who has been in Auschwitz has been part of the killing.
Of the 6,000 or 7,000 guards that went through Auschwitz, about 100 or so were prosecuted.
Then all of a sudden the prosecution in Germany changed the rules of the game. Anyone who served in a death camp could be prosecuted based on service alone of accessory to murder. The question then was, how many of these people were alive?
Germany's making up for it with what it's got. There's slim pickings these days for Nazi war criminals. They got Gruning, they went after them.
They're not Hitler, but they were there, therefore they too had a share of the responsibility.
He was a cog in the wheel, but the wheel couldn't have turned without that cog.
I do feel sorry for Göring. There was not 1 ounce of meanness in his body.
If you punish a man of 93 for something that he did when he was 23, are you still punishing the person who did the crime?
I cannot forget, I can't forget. If we don't learn from the past, we repeat the same mistakes again.
If we can send a powerful message that there is no statute of limitations on genocide, it could have an impact.
I have a responsibility, having survived. This is the last of the Nazi trials.
So why did it take so long to bring these war criminals to justice? Until recently, prosecutors were required to provide evidence that defendants were directly involved in the killings. In Canada, if 5 men walk into a bar and somebody they get drunk and someone picks up a bottle and hits another man on the head and kills him, the police arrests all 5 people, 4 of them. The 5th one goes by ambulance to the morgue. What did they do? Are all 4 men accused of murder? No. They start to talk to each one and they get at least one of them to start telling the truth. Who is the one who lifted the bottle and hit the head? Eventually, they come down to the person who did it. They have to have at least 1 witness, preferably 2. And if they can get 2 people to talk, they've got a case. They go to court. You cannot accuse all 4 men of having killed that person, the 5th one, because we have to know who did the deed. And that has been the problem in Germany, because the witnesses have died. They are gone. Close to 1 million people died in Auschwitz, in gas chambers. There are no witnesses who can say, this is Zafke, he pushed me into the gas chamber. There is no proof. So for years, Germany, besides not being very hot in pursuing these people, because they had enough problems with people who were still judges and courts and lawyers and engineers who had done some things and they had to be denazified. There was a whole process for the whole of Germany. They went through a very difficult time in Germany there, trying to find who are the people who really are guilty, who are the Nachfolger, the afterrunners, who are the people who are just taking advantage. And then that changed with the 2011 conviction of John Demanchuk, when a judge concluded that his activities as a camp worker in nationalist Nazi-occupied Poland amounted to complicity in mass murder. Now, Demanchuk was a Ukrainian young man who fought in the Russian army, the Soviet army, against Germany. He was taken prisoner. He decided, they persuaded a number of Ukrainians to join the German army instead of going to a prisoner of war camp and being badly mistreated. The Germans mistreated the Russian prisoners of war in a most awful way. I have witnessed it. So he joined the German, as the Ukrainian SS division. The SS were the Schutzstaffel and the Hitler's own volunteer army, so-called. They were the worst people. They were the people who served in the concentration camps. And he ran away after the war. He went to America, became a steel worker or an auto worker, and lived very quietly and had children and grandchildren. Finally, the Americans discovered that he didn't tell the truth when he arrived in America. So they said, this is a war criminal, because Germany was sending out messages, lists of people across the world to the police forces. Find those war criminals, we want to try them, send them to us. So United States requested which country wants to try him. And Israel picked up its hand. We have people who were in Travniki, in that terrible camp where he served. We want to try him. And they sent him to Israel. Here he is in the Israeli court in Jerusalem. And he served in a camp. And in that camp was a man whom they called Ivan the Terrible. Those who know Russian history, Ivan the Terrible was a Tsar, a vicious Tsar. I think he was in the 17th century, who killed his own son because he accused him of betrayal. And they called him Ivan the Terrible, this guy in the camp. A Ukrainian soldier, Ivan. The question was, is this man Ivan the Terrible of Travniki? They brought in Israel a number of witnesses who were there, survivors. They all came up, they looked at him, and they said, an old man, I'm not sure. Some said, maybe. One said yes, I think. The others said, I couldn't tell. The court convicted him of being Ivan the Terrible in Travniki. His lawyers in Israel went to the High Court, Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court threw it out. You haven't got enough witnesses, you haven't got enough evidence, let him go. When they let him go, Germany said, we want to try him. So they took him to Germany. Here he is now in Germany. And the German court had the same problem. Who knows who he is? He says he only worked on the outside of the camp. He was just a guard around the periphery. Who can tell? Nobody can tell. And then the judge in Germany did a very unusual thing. He said, you were in Travniki, a known miserable death torture camp where you all committed terrible crimes against humanity. It doesn't matter what you say you did. It doesn't matter what they say you did. You are guilty by being there. We have your card. We know that you were there from such a date to such a date. So he was committed in Germany and condemned because he was there. No need for an individual witness to say what he personally did. His lawyers went to the Supreme Court of Germany to say, that's not according to the Constitution, you can't do that. But John Demanchuk did them a favor. He died before the Supreme Court could handle it. So now it was left open. And the judges, in the case of those people that I showed you before, said, we are basing ourselves on this judgment that we can convict you because you were there, and we can figure exactly how many people you contributed to the death of. The result of all this, justice delayed is justice denied. We have to act promptly. Our own Supreme Court has recently pulled up all our courts. You are taking months, you are taking years to put a person before a judge. What's going on? And they put a limit to it, and a number of people in Canada were liberated, were allowed to go free. Some were murderers, and they were let free because the court said, you can't keep people waiting a year and a half in jail just because you are not ready with your paperwork or whatever. Another court case, a different one. A Holocaust denier against a history professor. A different kind of story. This is David Irving on the left side, a well-known writer in England, has written dozens of books, very popular, mostly about the war. His general theme is Hitler wasn't so bad. He did some bad things, but not as bad as you are painting him. And as for the Holocaust, the whole story is a lie. And gas chambers in Auschwitz, a total lie. There were no gas chambers in Auschwitz, said Mr. Irving. And he wrote it. He based himself, it's an interesting story actually, he based himself on the research, so-called, of a guy, an American, who is a guy who built the gas chambers and the electric chairs in the United States for the government. He hired him, or somebody hired him, to go to Auschwitz secretly, I mean as a visitor. But don't tell them why you are there. Scrape something, find some proof that there was gas in the gas chambers. So this guy went off to Auschwitz and he took a knife and he scraped the walls of the gas chambers. By the way, you can all visit the gas chambers. I'm going there in May again with 30 university students to visit Auschwitz and all the other, Treblinka and Majdanek, all the court. He climbed in there, in the hole, and he scraped the walls of the main gas chamber, and he brought it back to the United States, and he asked laboratories, 2 laboratories, to check if there is any sign of cyan gas in that sand, 65 years after the event. And both laboratories replied, there is nothing there. So he reported it to David Irving, and David Irving wrote, the whole thing is a lie, no gas chambers. Professor Deborah Lipstadt, an American historian, accused of libel by David Irving because she wrote, David Irving is a liar. He took her to High Court of England in the year 2000, and in England, libel, you have to prove that you are right calling him a liar. He doesn't have to prove that he is right. You have to prove that he was wrong. So Deborah Lipstadt was told, you better get yourself a couple of good lawyers. She got a top man, I forgot his name, I met him, a very nice man. And he said, I'm not bringing any Holocaust survivors to the courtroom because he will eat them alive, he will destroy them. And there were Holocaust survivors in England who went on public display with placards, we want to be heard. We were in Auschwitz. And the lawyer said, when they come into the court, Professor Lipstadt was very embarrassed about it. She wanted to bring some because they were pushing her, the Jewish community were pushing, get them into court. They were in Auschwitz. And the lawyer said, when that guy, witness, stands on the court, he will ask him, did you see the gas chamber? No, I didn't. How do you know there was one? I lost my parents there. How do you know that? Did you see the door where they went in? No. Did you see them carried out? No. I saw the chimney, I saw the gas, everybody told me they burned the bodies. Did you see them go in? If you didn't see them go in, don't tell me what you think. So Professor Lipstadt took the advice and did not invite any Holocaust survivors, and there were many furious people in London. But he told her, I want technical witnesses only. And she hired several people, asked several people, professors, one of historians, and one of them is Professor Robert Jan van Pelt, History of Architecture, Waterloo University. He created the term forensic architecture through an interesting history. When he studied as a student architecture, history of architecture, history of culture, he decided to write for his thesis, for the doctorate, which is the most important building in the world. And he wrote, I know the story because he's a friend of mine, and he wrote, the most important building in the world is the temple in Jerusalem. And he wrote a thesis and he defended it and he got his doctorate. But during the presentation of his thesis, a professor stuck him with another question. And what is the second most important building in the world? He wasn't ready for that. He didn't know what to say. That I didn't think. So he told them, I think it's the gas chambers of Auschwitz. He almost blurted it out, he says. He didn't think about it. But when he got his doctorate, he thought, I better go and have a look at Auschwitz. I don't know what I'm talking about. So he went back there, and it was the early days, and he walked in and he said, I am a historian. Have you got any of architecture? Have you got any drawings of Auschwitz? And they said, not many. They destroyed most of them. But there is one big box standing over there. We haven't opened it yet. Would you like to have a look? I believe there are drawings there. He opened this big iron box, and there were the drawings of Auschwitz, signed by architects, the gas chambers, the drawings of the buildings, everything. He studied them thoroughly. He took copies, he photographed, and he became the world's expert on Auschwitz, out of Holland, totally out of left field. Now, Professor Lipstadt asked him to come and give evidence. So he took them to Auschwitz and he showed them what he's talking about. He showed them the drawings, the lawyer, and he prepared 750 pages of evidence for the court. He stood in front of the judge for 5 days. He was a main witness. Forensic architecture. He showed the signatures of the architects who drew this up. He showed them how they took what was originally a mortuary room to keep dead bodies, and they changed the doors from opening inward to opening outward, because the dead bodies would be inside in the gas chamber. They would press against the door, you couldn't open the door. So the door had to open, the hinges had to be changed, and they had to be made gas-proof. All this is on the drawings, signed by architects. He also attended the court case of the 2 architects who signed those drawings in Vienna. They were let free. We didn't do anything, we just made a drawing of a building. Professor Robert Jan van Pelt teaches his students, doctors have a Hippocratic oath. They have to swear to promise not to do harm. Engineers and lawyers should do the same, and particularly architects. The English High Court, 2000. The judge summarized his findings as follows. Irving is an active Holocaust denier. He is anti-Semitic and racist. On the issue of Auschwitz, the judge stated that there is no doubt there were gas chambers in Auschwitz and that they were operated to kill hundreds of thousands of Jews. Court case confirmed. Now, last year was a biennale in Venice. The art biennale is 1 year, and the architectural biennale the next. Every second year they change over. So the architectural biennale in Venice was taking place. And the chief architect of the exhibition is an architect, I forgot his name, a famous architect from South America. And he read the book that Robert Jan van Pelt wrote, and I have the book, it's a big book, The Evidence for Auschwitz. So he called him up and he said, listen, would you like to make a presentation of your evidence as a physical display at the Architectural Biennale? Robert Jan van Pelt took it to his students were very enthusiastic, they took it on. And they built a display. This is a rough drawing of the display, and it shows several items. They built 2 doors to the gas chamber, exactly from the drawings from the Auschwitz chambers. With the same, they made the hardware, they made the hinges, they made the wood exactly, copies. They took the drawings and they copied them over in 3-dimensional castings in plaster of Paris. So you can, not black and white lines, everything is white, but you can touch it, you can see the lines as standing out from the sculpture plates. And they also built in the middle here a gas chamber, a gas column. Now this is something interesting. Here's another picture of it now at the Rome, because that exhibit was very successful in Venice, and the exhibit was brought now to the Rome Museum, Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. You can go and see it still. It's supposed to close in January, but I love it. It brings so many people. So it's staying there for a while, and then it will travel in the country. They also had this. I mean, in the back here is a door into one of the 5 gas chambers. There were 5 gas chambers in Auschwitz, and you can walk into some of them yourself when you come there. And they had a door with here a small little door, which they opened and poured in the pellets of the cyanide gas, the Zyklon B, to poison the people inside. The men used to put on a gas mask. And this is a very unusual structure. This is an image that they found. They didn't find the original because the Germans destroyed it when they blew up Auschwitz before they left. But they found the man who built it for Auschwitz. In the main gas chamber, they had to insert the pellets of gas which melt and dissolve into gas from the top through the ceiling. So they built this kind of unit that went through the ceiling of the gas chamber into the open, outdoors. It consists of 2 nets, one inside the other. The outer net is thick metal, the inner metal is thin metal. It's made so that the prisoners could not get into it. And inside is lowered a bucket with pellets of cyanide, with a rope. The cyanide is lowered, and 45 minutes, 2,000 people were dead. 4 such columns were built. They got from the guy who built them in Auschwitz the drawing how to do it. Here's another picture with the colored plates that are mounted on a stand. Here is a little gas chamber. Here's the other gas chamber door with a metal grid over the peephole to see if everything is okay to open the door. This is a gas column, and here's a drawing, one of the main drawings. This is a 4 windows, the 4 gas columns coming from the roof. Here is a crematoria where they were burning the bodies. The bodies were dragged from here, put on a little elevator, brought here along a band which carried the bodies, and were burned in these multiple ovens. Then the bones and what remained was ground up in a grinder and then made into dust and then distributed, thrown into the river and into the lake around there. This is what you see when you go to the evidence room at the Royal Ontario Museum. Now, I had the privilege of seeing this being constructed in Hamilton. Robert Jan invited me to come and see this. And when I saw the bucket here and that, and I realized what it is, how it worked, I said to him, I feel the cold spine of history on my back. He says, that's a good sentence, Elly. Write a foreword to my book here, to a little book. So when you get a little book in the museum, this is my story there. It is mind-boggling how human beings can work with such technical skill to achieve such aims. So I ask, can there be forgiveness without the perpetrator asking for it? Can there be no hate without forgiveness? I will talk about hate a little later. And now I'll tell you my story. Enough with history. I was born in Lithuania, in a little country in the middle of Europe, at the north end. Here's Poland, here's Germany, here's Russia, Norway. And when the Germans occupied the whole of Europe in 1941, on the 15th of June, when they invaded Russia and Poland, the war started in 1939. They took everything. They had Norway, the whole of France was occupied, Italy was a partner, the whole of southern Europe. Below the Mediterranean on the south end was Africa, occupied by Germany. And a huge part of the Soviet Union, Moscow, very nearly fell to the German army. It came very close to Moscow. Lithuania is right here, my little country. We were invaded in the first day of the war. It was a Sunday, I think, if I remember, and I was waiting to go with my parents to a summer house somewhere. And suddenly there were tanks in the streets. What is going on? They didn't declare war. We didn't have an announcement even. Our president ran away, escaped. The life of the Jews in Lithuania, in Kovno, the capital of Lithuania at the time, Kaunas. Anybody here from Lithuanian grandparents? No? I'm surprised. Sometimes I get. Before the war, I lived a normal life. Here I am with my mother as a kid. I went to school. I was an only child. My mother was a nurse in the hospital, a surgical nurse. My father worked in a bank as a bookkeeper. He wanted to be an engineer, studied in Leningrad, Petrograd actually, before the revolution. Engineering, 2 years, but he had to stop because the revolution came, so he couldn't finish, so he was a bookkeeper in a bank. That didn't make him happy, and he didn't earn much money. But that's what it was. And I had a good life. I went to school, a Jewish family. I liked science. I enjoyed mathematics, physics, the history of science. I liked to read a lot about other countries. I dreamt one day to go to a country that grows banana trees, that has palm trees. I never saw any of that. And when I turned 13, I was ready for high school. I got a uniform, brand new uniform. Grade 6 I graduated, and I got this uniform to go to high school. I was looking forward to it. At that time, I remember I had a hobby, building model aeroplanes. I loved anything that flies. I was fascinated by aeronautics. I used to build good models. I learned how to design them even. And I dreamt at that time, that I want to be an engineer and I want to be a pilot. I want to fly an airplane one day. Now, if I was 13 in 1941, how old am I now? Well, some of you might be mathematically challenged. So I'll tell you, I've just had my 90th birthday. And immediately, life in our city changed. We were attacked, we were mistreated, we were killed. 5,000 Jews were killed in the first 2 days of the war by local Lithuanian people before the Germans even took over. And I will start my story from what happened 3 years later. We were put in a ghetto. 20,000 Jews were crammed into one small part of town. We were attacked in the streets. People put on white armbands, took a rifle, went around, arrested Jews, tied them up their arms with a rope, as you see here in the picture, and robbed them and killed them. They killed 5,000 Jews approximately in the first 2 weeks of the war. Historically, it's interesting, the Lithuanians formed immediately a provisional government. They thought the Germans would allow them to run Lithuania free from the Russians, from the Soviets, who occupied our country a year before. It was dangerous to go out in the street because you got grabbed and killed. We had to wear a yellow Star of David very soon. They told us not to walk on the sidewalk, walk in the gutter. We can't go shopping except 4 o'clock in the afternoon when the shops are empty already from food. It wasn't good. But I'll tell you what happened 3 years later first. After 3 years, out of 20,000 Jews, there were only 8,000 of us left in the ghetto. The ghetto surrounded an old part of town with barbed wire, soldiers, nobody can get out, all the Christians had to move out. Lithuania is a Catholic country. And we stayed there for 3 long years. From 20,000 we were left 8,000. And now the Russian army was winning the war. After Stalingrad, after the big battles, the Russian army was marched into Lithuania. They were at the border of our city. We could hear the guns. Very soon we will be free from the German occupation. The Russian army is coming. And we will be free, perhaps. What will they do with us during this switchover? And the Nazis announced, when I say Nazis, I mean the National Socialist Party of Germany, Hitler's party. The Nazis announced, we are liquidating the ghetto. Liquidation for us meant one thing, they are going to kill us. But they said, we are taking you guys somewhere else to work. We didn't believe them. We were certain they were going to march us up the hill and kill us like they killed the others. So our family decided we are not going where they want to take us. We are going to hide. We are going to hide, and if they find us, we will commit suicide. We will not be shot up on the hill. We went down into the cellar of our house. It was a 2-story wooden house on a cement foundation. And in the foundation there were rooms just as upstairs, with doors. We opened the door, we found old furniture stacked up and mess and spider webs. So we cleaned it out, we took everything into another room opposite in the same passage. And we brought water and food. And we were ready. My 3 uncles, my aunt, my parents and I. Before going in, we dragged a heavy cupboard in front of the door, so it shouldn't be obvious there was a door there. And we crawled through the cupboard into the room. And now everybody turned to my mother, who was working as a surgical sister in the hospital in the ghetto. Sonja, are you ready? And my mother said, yes, I'm ready. She laid out a tray with a white cloth, very clean, and on it she had a number of syringes lying there, filled with a brown drug. And she said, this drug, we give it to older people when their pulse is beating too slow, their heart is too slow, to speed it up. But I'm going to give everybody a big injection, a large volume. That will make the heart race and stop, create a heart attack. Are you sure it will work? I'm sure it will work. I confirmed with the surgeon. Next to each syringe, my mother puts a bit of cotton wool, and she has a bottle of alcohol on the side. I've seen her do it before. And I thought about it and I said, Mother, this is the last injection, doesn't have to be a clean one. I'm glad you can laugh, because it is funny. But I'll tell you, grade 10s don't laugh, they are terrified of the thought. We all laughed, except my mother. She said, I've been doing it like that all my life. But she took away the cotton wool and the alcohol. I was 16-year-old. I was sitting there wondering, what's it like to die of a heart attack? Doesn't the brain go on when the heart stops? Good question. I know the answer now, by the way. We have about 15 minutes from the time the heart stops till the brain stops feeling pain, runs out of oxygen. So if you ever feel you are getting a heart attack, don't drive yourself to the hospital. Call the ambulance, okay? That's a useful lesson, even if you get nothing else out of this visit. We are sitting for 3 days and nights. There is no window. We don't know what's going on outside. Silence. And on the 4th morning, 2 soldiers are coming down the stairs with their big boots. They are hitting the roof, hitting the floor with the rifles' butts. They come down, they are talking, they walk past the cupboard. They go to the end of the passage, they kick in the door of the coal shed, they come back. They are standing next to our cupboard. Now, I decided that if my mother is going to inject us, I'm going to go first. First of all, I'm an only child. I always come first. But those of you who are only children know what I mean, but don't tell the others. I didn't want to see my family die. I thought there would be cries, there would be pain probably. I didn't know what there would be, but I don't want to see it, I figured. So I'm going first. So as soon as we heard the soldiers there, I moved up in front of my mother. And when the soldiers were there, I bared my arm, and she was holding a syringe in her hand. And we are listening. If they start moving the cupboard, she will inject. They came up to the cupboard, and one of them walks into the room opposite where we stacked the furniture, and he comes out and he says to the other one, "There's nobody here, just furniture." And he walked out. So my mother put away the syringe. We are sitting again. I'm not sitting, I can't sit on a hard chair, I'm lying on a blanket on the floor. I couldn't even read, the light wasn't strong enough. 2 days, 3 days, I think it was about 3 or 4 days we sat like that. And suddenly, it was very quiet, nothing, day and night looked the same. And suddenly one of my uncles said, "You know, I think the Russians must be here already. They were just outside the city, we could hear the guns. How long can it take them to take our city? Let's go out and have a look, because we could sit here forever. Nobody will come looking for us. Nobody knows we are here." So we crawled through the cupboard and we went outside. And we look and we see the Nazi guards are there, and our people are marching to a train. A train? They don't need a train to take us up the hill. We can walk there. Perhaps they didn't lie to us. Perhaps they are taking us somewhere to work. We went to a train. As soon as the train took off, by the way, they burned down every house in the ghetto. 3,000 people were hiding like we were. They all got burnt in the houses, or they came out when the fire started, and they were shot to death. Nobody survived there. But we went to the train. Now what happened in those 3 years in the ghetto that would make a woman like my mother willing to kill her family and herself? And that is the story of Ghetto Kovno. It started, as I said, they packed 20,000 people into this surrounded barbed wire place. We had one small room, my parents and I, in a house. Very crowded conditions. And very soon after, they announced, "We are coming door to door to visit you. Stay home. We are going to demand that you hand over all your valuables. And if you hide something and we find it, we will kill you on the spot. So don't try anything." 2 soldiers, officers, I don't know, people in uniform, came into our little room. Put on the table, they said, "All your money, your pocket, your valuables, your gold and silver, anything of value, jewelry, bring it all here." My father, with shaking hands, emptied his pockets of his money. My mother brought her jewelry. We had a pair of silver candlesticks. We put it down. "Have you got a camera?" "Yes." My father had a camera. "Put it here." "Have you got any furs?" My mother had a fur. "Bring it." They had a look at it. Good. They started to pack it all up. One of them was standing there writing, making a list of what they stole from us. Then he asked us, "What is your surname?" "Gotz." Wrote it down and gave us a copy. It's like somebody breaks into your house, steals your television set and gives you a receipt with his address and telephone number. It doesn't make sense, but it does make sense to them, because in Germany they wrote everything down. It is an orderly nation. They follow the rules. If they are told to write it down, they write it down. They documented everything. Somewhere there exists a receipt for my mother's jewelry and my father's camera. And the silver candlesticks, yeah, they cost a lot of money. They packed it all up and they took it away. After that came another order. You must hand over all your books. You must bring all the books to the central collection center. Gold and silver we didn't have much. We were not wealthy people. But books, we had a lot of books. My father loved books. Every Friday he used to buy another book. He took out of his little meager income some money he left for books. He had a big library. He used to go and borrow books for reading. Novels. He didn't buy novels unless they were the classics. But he bought good books, books that were of interest to him, on history, on philosophy, on everything else, on technology. Lots of books. I had my own library. And when we had to move into the ghetto, he packed them all in cartons and insisted that every carton goes to the ghetto. My mother wanted to take other things. You couldn't take everything. We were not allowed to hire a truck. We were only allowed wheelbarrows or horse-drawn carriages or carry it. But all the books had to come. And now we're living in a little room, barely space for 3 beds. My father's books are lined up on one wall, against the wall, the cartons. No place to open them. And now he has to give up his books. So he was very upset. He went into his books and he scratched around and he pulled out a number of less important, less valuable to him books. And he put them in a wheelbarrow. And he and I went with the wheelbarrow to deliver the books to the collection center. The collection center turned out to be the local synagogue, a house of prayer of the Jews. They took out all the benches and they told everybody, throw the books on the floor. 20,000 Jews had a lot of books. By the time we arrived at noontime, there was a mountain of books from the floor all the way halfway up the wall. And people were coming in and falling, slipping on books and dropping more books. So my dad looks around and he says to me, you notice? With the books they trust us. There are no soldiers, no guards, nobody's watching. Then he bends down, and I remember it so clearly. He picks up a beautiful red book, and there were more on the floor. Look, he says, Pushkin, the greatest Russian poet. Кто говорит по-русски? Who speaks Russian here? Anybody? Вы знаете Pushkina? You know Pushkin? Of course. Since childhood, right? Pushkin is the greatest Russian poet, like Shakespeare in English. He died in 1838. Actually, he died in a duel. He was shot. He had a duel. He suspected the son of the French ambassador to be interested in his wife. So he called him for a duel. You know what a duel is? 10 steps back, you turn around and you fire at each other with a pistol. Now Pushkin was a great poet, but a lousy shot. The other guy killed him. So 1838 he died. 1938 they published everything Pushkin wrote. 5 volumes of beautifully bound. And my father says, this Pushkin collection, he says, I always wanted to buy it, but I couldn't afford it. And now it's on the floor. You know what Elly said to me? Take out our books from the wheelbarrow and leave them here. They are not so valuable. And I'm going to take the Pushkin. We'll take it home. So he puts it in the wheelbarrow. Then he walks around and he looks at books. He loves books. Picks up a book, looks at it lovingly, puts it down, another book. He says, 2 volumes. Gretz Geschichte der Juden. That's in German. Gretz History of the Jews. That's a good set. Put it in. The long and the short, my father picked the best books he could find. He only was very selective. After a while I said, Dad, it's full, I can't take any more. Okay, cover it up with a newspaper. We are going home. And we did it 7 times. We went empty and we came back full. We didn't bring any of our books after that. My mother was having a fit and I can't blame her. There were books on the floor, books on the beds, books on the table, a pile of books. She was screaming, "What are you doing? You want them to come and shoot us here?" "Don't worry," said my father, "we are not keeping it here, there's no place anyway." Elly said to me, "Climb up the ladder on the shed." Outside the house there was a garden shed, and on the rafters there were boards lying like a ceiling. He said, "Put them all on top of the ceiling there. If anybody finds them, it's not ours. We don't know who put them there." So slowly, over a couple of days, I carried all the books up there. Then came another order. Everyone has to go to work. Slave labor, you are not getting paid. You are lucky we are feeding you. Every morning, people had to collect in front of the gate. This is a ghetto gate. And they were told, "We need 50 people to go and clean the floors in the military hospital. We need 200 people to dig roads somewhere. We need 20 people to work in a wood factory. Who can do woodwork? Okay, gather over here." And these groups were collected, marched out of the ghetto, under guard, soldiers, 20 people, 2 soldiers. They were marched to their workplace, and they were marched back in the evening, so they shouldn't run away. Always wearing a yellow Star of David, front and back. If you didn't have one, you got beaten up. People started to go to work. From the age of 15 to the age of 65. But I was 13, I didn't have to go. So I went upstairs in my library. I made bookshelves out of bricks and boards. And I sorted out my books. And I had the Library of Europe in my hands. I had the best of the Russian literature. I should explain, I spoke those languages. When I was a kid, I was brought up, I spoke Yiddish. Yiddish is a language of the Jews of Eastern Europe, Poland, Russia, Lithuania. It's a Germanic language. It sounds a little bit like German, but it's written with Hebrew letters. The history is interesting. 1,000 years before, in the year 1093, the Pope gave an order. All Christians of Europe, get up your weapons if you have, and come to Italy and take a ship and go to Palestine, to Israel, to fight the Muslims, because they occupy Jerusalem. This is the birthplace of our Lord Jesus Christ. We have to drive them out of there. The first crusade. There were 3 big crusades and a number of smaller ones, I believe. Now these crusaders were just a mob, people in a great religious fervor, picked up weapons, spears, swords, whatever they had, and they marched across Europe as a mob. And when they came across a Jewish village or a Jewish settlement, they would kill the Jews and burn down their houses. So the German Jews from the Alsace started to run away, and they went east, towards Poland, towards Russia. Now, the German Jews spoke German, but they couldn't write German. Nobody could write German. People who were learned wrote Latin, mostly the priests and the university people, but the general folk couldn't read or write. But the Jews told all their children to read and write Hebrew, because Jews pray in Hebrew. The Hebrew prayers have to be known by every Jew, and they have to be able to read it in a prayer book. So the Jewish children were taught from early age to read and write Hebrew. Now the German Jews were in Poland. They were speaking German. They wanted to write to each other. They started to write German with Hebrew letters. And that became Yiddish, my tongue, 1,000-year-old language. Now a rich literature, poetry, everything, science. So I spoke Yiddish to my parents. But when and I went to a Yiddish school. But when my parents wanted to talk to each other about me, so I shouldn't understand, they spoke Russian. How long do you think it took me to learn Russian? Not at all. Not long. But I kept quiet. I didn't tell them. I wanted to know what they are saying. When I was 10-year-old, my parents discovered, to their total amazement, the kid speaks Russian. What a miracle. Now, when I went downstairs to play with the kids in the street, I spoke Lithuanian, the language of the country. Now, Lithuanian is nothing like anything you have ever heard. It's a totally different language. It has a different sound, and it is close to Sanskrit, the ancient language of the Himalayas. It's older than Latin. I'll give you a sample of Lithuanian. I can't speak it anymore, but I remember poetry. Pialėsies ir kerpėms apaugus aukštai, štai trakų garbinga pilis. Jos aukštus valdovus užmigdė kapai, štai stūkso ir žiūri į mus. It's an ancient burial place of great heroes of our old age who are sleeping now in the dust, and they are looking at us. Maironis, a famous Lithuanian poet. So I spoke Lithuanian fluently, of course. I knew it very well. I also knew German, because we had a massive number of German refugees run away from Hitler. Jewish refugees mostly. They lived amongst us, in our midst. So I heard a lot of German. They used to come to the house, and we had also some German people. We knew quite a few. I knew German, I learned German, I heard it from very early on. My parents spoke German too. And I now had the Russian literature in front of me, the German literature. I read Tolstoy in the original, War and Peace, Anna Karenina, Tolstoy, Lermontov, the moderns, Maxim Gorky, and Pushkin. I loved Pushkin. I learned Pushkin's poems by heart. I loved them. I still remember some now. I studied the German literature, the classic literature, Goethe, Schiller, Heine, the poets, the modern poets. I knew one German poet I admired very much. I can't even remember now the name, but I discovered he was a big Nazi. Well, he was a good poet. That was my education. No school for me. And we went to work. People went to work. One day, it all started on the 15th of June 1941, when the German army marched into without declaring war. July, August, we are in the ghetto. September, October. Everybody goes to work every morning. I'm sitting upstairs reading. I had to lift out 2 tiles from the roof because there was no electricity up there, so the sun would come in. But I read a lot. I had a lot of time. October 1941, end of October. An announcement. Nobody goes to work tomorrow morning. Everyone has to gather in a big open field in the middle of the ghetto, called, interestingly, Democratic Place, Democracy Place. 20,000 Jews came out because they warned us, don't stay home. If we find anyone, they will be shot on the spot. Leave the doors open. We are coming to check. 20,000 Jews are gathered in a big open field. Babies, sick people, everybody. In front of us stands a man in the uniform of the SS, and he demanded, come past me, families, walk past me. This family, go to the right, back to the ghetto. This family, go and stand outside the fence. And there were guards there, though they couldn't run away. Took a whole day. The man stood in white gloves. He had a little stick pointing. And lunchtime, he ate his sandwich while he was doing it. He couldn't spend a moment because he had 20,000 people in front of him. Took him a whole day until evening. 6 o'clock he was finished. Our family walked past him right at the end. He doesn't seem to be interested in us. He said, just go away. So we went back to the ghetto. And we were wondering, where is it better to be? Half our population was standing outside the fence. Where is it better? What's going to happen to us here? We had no idea. We had a sleepless night. And in the early morning, we saw those 10,000 people outside being marched away up the hill towards the 9th Fort. The 9th Fort was a fortified military compound. It had stone walls, very big one. Soldiers used to practice shooting there and so on. on the 29th of October 1941. 10,000 men, women and children were murdered in one day with machine guns, and their bodies were thrown in long trenches dug before by Russian prisoners of war. We found out what happened there, because some guys escaped and they came back to the ghetto and they said everybody there is dead. I lost 3/4 of my classmates there. I lost family members there on the 9th fort. Who was the man who was sorting us? The man who was in charge of this whole killing operation. His name is well known to Canadians. He lived amongst us here. Helmut Raucher. Helmut Raucher came to Canada in 1950. He ran away from Germany. He knew he would get to court. He arrived, and 6 years later he got his citizenship. This is his passport from his citizenship. He wasn't arrested until 32 years later. Now Germany was looking for him and for other war criminals. They sent out lists to the whole world police forces. Find these war criminals and send them back to us. We want to put them in court. Argentina had thousands. America had thousands. Argentina had tens of thousands. There were many of them, and Canada got a good number of them in too. When he arrived, they asked him, "What did you do during the war?" He said, "I was a police officer." No more questions. Okay. He stayed. He lived in Huntsville on the way to the park. He bought a motel. He had a lot of money. Our money. Everyone who worked there in the ghetto against us, they all collected something for themselves. He lived a peaceful, quiet life. Twice his daughter, his wife and his son came to visit him in Canada. No problem. Now, the Canadian RCMP got these lists. They couldn't find him for 32 years. You know why they couldn't? Because Mr. Trudeau, the father of our present Prime Minister, told the RCMP, "Don't look for those war criminals. Because we have got here Germans and Jews and Ukrainians and Russians and Poles, and there will be a whole fight about who did what to whom. We don't want to import it here in Canada. Don't look for them." So they didn't. But finally, in 1982, they arrested him. I could have found him in 5 minutes if I knew they were looking for him. He was in the phone book in Toronto under his own name. Do you know what a phone book is? He sold his motel and he moved into Toronto, and he was living on York Mills and Bayview. He was my neighbor. In fact, I was amazed. The RCMP came to my mother and asked her if she remembers him, and she said, "Of course I remember him." They said, "Could you identify him in a picture?" And she could not. She said, "I was afraid to look at him. But Helmut Raucher, I know who he is. He sorted us. He killed half our people." That man, personally, he was an organizer, but personally, he came into the ghetto one day and took away a family. Professor Shapiro, his wife, Professor Shapiro's mother, and the son. The son was Itamar Shapiro, a very good friend of mine. What happened was, the grandfather of my friend was a chief rabbi of Lithuania, Rabbi Shapiro, a very wise old man. He came into the ghetto with his family, and he died 2 weeks before he discovered that he was there. He discovered because the son of Rabbi Shapiro lived in England, and he wrote a letter to the Red Cross asking them, "Could you find what happened to my father in Kaunas in Lithuania?" So Raucher drove into the ghetto with his own car, and he started to ask, "Where's Rabbi Shapiro?" They said, "He just died, 2 weeks ago he died." "And where is his family?" "Over there." He went in and he took away Professor Shapiro, the son of the rabbi. He was a professor of Semitic languages at the university in Kaunas. His wife and his Mrs. Shapiro, the old lady, the wife of the rabbi, and my friend Itamar Shapiro. He took them up to the 9th fort, and he personally made them kneel down, and he shot them in the back of the head with his revolver. He didn't want any evidence of contacts with England. So that man is not only an organizer of murder, he's a personal murderer. On another occasion, when they arrested the elders of our ghetto, and he came in, and he was drunk, and he spoke to Dr. Elkes, who was the head of our ghetto, and he asked him, "What do you do?" He said, "I'm a physician." He says, "I am a Genickschusser. I am a shooter in the back of the head." And Professor Elkes answered him, "I respect every profession." Dr. Elkes died in Dachau with me, in my barrack. Now, that man finally went to court in Toronto. And the judge said, this man is accused of 11,584 murders. He should be tried here. He's a Canadian citizen. We don't send people out, but we don't have any evidence. Send him to Germany. It was the first Canadian citizen to be sent out to be tried in another country, as far as I know. Nothing happened to Helmut Raucher. He died before the court case came to be. It took a long time to prepare a court case. Of course, they were looking for witnesses, a whole business. Nothing happened to him. He died a peaceful life. A peaceful death, I should say. And how do we know that what I'm telling you about killing of 10,000 people in Kaunas on the 29th of October 1941, on the 9th fort, how do we know this is true? Because we have a document, a German document. This is a report of Einsatzkommando 3. Einsatzkommando was a group of volunteer soldiers taken from the army and told, there's a tough job to do, you have to come and face people and shoot them, civilians, face to face. Are you prepared to do it? And if they said no, they said you can get out, we'll get somebody else. And that Commando number 3 moved across Lithuania from July to December 1st, and this is a report, state secret. In compliance with my directives, etc., Lithuanian partisans have carried out the following executions. You see, the shooting was done by Lithuanian volunteers, not by the Germans themselves. 92 executions are listed on the following pages, showing how many Jewish men, women and children were murdered in each execution. The total number, 137,346. There are altogether 200,000 Jews in Lithuania approximately. 2/3 of us or so, or 3/4, whatever, were killed in the first 5 months of the war, before Auschwitz, before gas chambers, before execution, right in Lithuania, in the small towns that they lived in. Here's an excerpt. 29th of October 1941. Kovno, 9th fort, 2,007 Jewish men, 2,920 women and 4,300 children, total 9,300. And then comes an explanation. Removal from the ghetto of surplus Jews. We had too many, so we had to kill them. What could we do? Signed Jäger, Standartenführer, that's a high rank officer. You will go out in life and you will hear of people who say that the Holocaust is a lie. We call them Holocaust deniers. And there are those people in every country. We've heard before about England. Here is one in Canada. A Canadian Holocaust denier, Monica Schaefer, a musician from Alberta. She was born probably after the war ended. She referred to the Holocaust as the biggest and most pernicious, persistent lie in all of history. She is an expert. Schaefer was a Green Party candidate for Alberta riding of Yellowhead in 2006 and 2008. She didn't make it politically, but she's got something to say. She's a singer, but she's got something to say about the Holocaust. She's not a historian. you will hear from Holocaust deniers. For all kinds of reasons, they somehow deny the Holocaust, the murder of the Jews. Many of them at the same time wish that Hitler had finished the job. So there is a split between what they want and what they expect and what they are saying. The ghetto. They killed half of us. They reduced the size of the ghetto. They started a school. They asked permission from the Nazis, our management. We want to train kids from 12 to 15. They have to work at 15, go for slave labor, working. We want to train them so they could have a trade, so they could do something useful for Germany. Because we had workshops in the ghetto, making uniforms and boots for the army, and repairing automobiles and all kinds of things. So they need technicians, they need mechanics, they need people. They made a school for metal work, and another one for bricklaying, and another one for woodwork, and for the girls sewing and knitting. And I joined the locksmith school, the metalwork school. And I loved it. I just loved it. It was so interesting. First of all, I forgot about my fear of what will happen to me, how will I die, because that was a big issue. How will I die? After we heard that 10,000 people died, I was imagining every night what it's like to be shot, and I had a nightmare that I was shot but not killed, and I was thrown in a trench, and there are people, dead bodies on top of me, and I can't breathe. That was a nightmare I lived with for a long time. So I was very happy to go to school, and I learned a trade. I learned locksmithing, how to fit keys and make locks and install locks, how to open locks when you lose a key. I learned all the techniques. I learned even how safes are built and how to open them when there is a problem. I learned metalwork, cutting, filing, drilling metal, polishing, making things out of metal. I learned blacksmithing, I learned welding, I learned all the metal trades. And I was a good student, so in a year and a half I graduated. They said to me, you have to go to work now, you are 15, but you can come here and you can work as a teacher and we'll get you an exemption. I said yes. I loved it. I became a teacher at 15, 14 and a half even. I was teaching other kids. I was having a wonderful time. I loved it. I enjoyed it. And I had a little workshop and I started to earn money on the side doing things. People needed keys, people had something broken, sewing machines needed repairing. There was a big market, a black market. You could sell to the peasants, to the farmers, through the fence. After bribing the guard, you could take out through the fence stuff. And they were prepared to pay a lot of money in the form of butter and meat and bread for valuable things. Sewing machines became very popular. So I became an expert at sewing machines, to repair them, to fix them, to make parts if they were broken. The only problem was the farmers wanted only Singer sewing machines. But what about Pfaff? There is a German company, famous, Pfaff, P-F-A-F-F, hard to pronounce. Pfaff machines were no good. So we got an artist to cover over the Pfaff and put on Singer. What do you think? No problem. They couldn't tell the difference. We sold the sewing machines and I was making parts. So I had a good time. I developed a little business at the time. We had electricity, but we didn't have equipment to heat water. Electric kettles we didn't have. So we discovered apparently that if you take two electrodes and you put on 220 volts on them and you dip it in water, the water boils in no time. So people started to take a piece of wood, put on two wires or two pieces of metal, nail it on with a nail, put on two wires. It was a dangerous device because you could get killed if you touched it, and used to dip in the water. So I decided I'll make a nice one. I made a wooden one, a nice machined one with a nice handle, and I covered the wires with wood. So mine became very popular. So I was selling them left and right, as many as I could make, to heat water. About 18 years ago, my wife and I went to Washington, D.C. from Toronto. we went to the Holocaust Museum in the United States. Fantastic institution. How many of you have been there? United States. We are standing upstairs and we are watching the screen that says Kovno Ghetto. That's where I was. And I tell my wife, oh, I recognize this is where the management was, that's where my school was. And the next picture, it's my student. I remember the kid. Such a nice boy. You see he's wearing a yellow Star of David here. He's working on the lathe that I put together. We found in the ghetto a lathe and we cleaned it up. I worked a week to clean it up. He's working on the lathe. Oh, I said, such a nice boy he was. I'm sure he didn't survive. He was younger than I was. And the next picture, I said, Esme, that's me. That guy in the middle with the black hair, that's me. Make no mistake. Yeah, that's me. I recognize myself. The only picture I have of the war. I was so amazed. Here are all the boys standing around me with the yellow stars of David on their chest, you see. So I went to management and I said, give me my picture, I want a copy. Oh, they were very excited. Do you remember the names of these boys? I don't, but I don't think they survived. They were younger than I was. They couldn't have made it. I got the picture home to Toronto. I showed it to everybody. All my friends saw it. So somebody told the Star. And a journalist from the Star came to interview me. Hello, Mr. Gotz, you have a picture from the war? Yes, I have it. Tell us about it. So I told him my whole story. I had a whole page in the Star with my story. And here and this picture. 2 weeks later, the guy calls me from the Star. Mr. Gotz, somebody recognized you in that picture. I said, what do you mean? He says, the guy on your left hand, he says he remembers you. He's alive? Yes, he's alive. Where is he? I want to talk to him. I can't believe it. He's alive. Let me talk to him. Well, he's not here. He's in Tel Aviv. He's in Israel. How the paper got that day to Israel, not that day, in a couple of days, I don't know. Apparently a teacher was here in Toronto that day when this came out. He saw it and he said, I have a friend who was in Ghetto Kovno. I'll show him the article. He brought it to him and the guy, this one on the left, he said, that's Elly Gotz and that's me. So what do you think I did? I flew to Tel Aviv. I had to meet that guy. And here he is sitting next to me. We are having lunch. And he thanked me. Elly says, you taught me well. I now have a factory. I'm building machines for winding wire and I'm selling them all over the world, especially in Turkey they need it. Amazing guy. And he says, I brought you 2 other students of yours. Oh yes, who are they? Well, one of them happens to be my cousin. So I knew he was in my ghetto school. And he was a very naughty boy. I had trouble with him because he was my cousin. He said he had extra rights, you know. And this one, he is now a dental technician, now retired in Tel Aviv. And this one is a professor of agronomy. He's planting trees all over Israel. He's worked at the Weizmann Institute, he's working. Well, it was a wonderful lunch. We sat for 4 hours talking. We couldn't stop. Each one of us survived by a miracle. All of us were in Dachau after the ghetto. So that is the story of my picture, which I love to this day. Another story about the ghetto. One more, and then we'll move on. My little cousin. My little cousin was born just before the war. She was 6 months old when she came in the ghetto, and a year later she was living in a room with 12 other people, adults. Noisy, a lot of noise. And that child, nobody has time for her. Her father and the others get out every morning and disappear for slave labor there in the city, and her mother is cooking for 12 people, and she hasn't got time for her, and she's in a bad mood. So she said to me, Elly, when you come from the school, play with your cousin. She has got nobody. She is so lonely here. Take her out. Take her for a walk. So I started to look after that girl. A lovely girl. At a year and a half, she was speaking fluently. Yiddish, of course. So I took her out and I told her stories and I watched her, and every day she learned 5 new words. It was amazing to see how bright, how quick a child learns. I started to put her to bed, I started to feed her. After a while, I felt I have a baby. It's my baby. At 15, I had a baby. Don't do it. You are more than 50, you are allowed. One day, my uncle said, he was a big pessimist, he said, "They are going to kill us all. I would like my child to live. I have to get her out of the ghetto." So he writes a letter to a good friend of his, a Catholic, a very nice man, a journalist, a translator from Italian, a very fine man, whom he knew as a customer, because my uncle was a top tailor, a fashion tailor for men. So he knew him, he was one of his customers and they were friends. So he asked him, wrote him a letter secretly. We didn't have mail in the ghetto, but we managed to smuggle out mail. So he writes to him, "Would you take my child?" And a letter comes back from his wife, whom my uncle didn't know. And she writes, "I don't know where my husband is. The Russians arrested him before the Germans came. They actually killed him. He was a Lithuanian nationalist. He wrote, the Russians shouldn't occupy our country. In 1940, they occupied Lithuania. We became part of the Soviet Union." So he was taken away and he was shot to death in Belarusia. She didn't know that, but she said, "My husband is not here. I have no children. I'll take your girl. Where can I meet you?" To make arrangements. So my uncle writes back that he works in a wood factory somewhere in the town. She comes there at noontime, he sneaks out, he talks to her, and he tells her that he's got some valuables hidden away, and he will give it to her to sell, to upkeep the child, for upkeep. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "I will not take anything from you, only the child. I have enough." How can we get her out? Arrangements were made. One morning, my mother gave the child a big injection, anesthetic, knocked her out completely. They put her in a rucksack. Uncle put it on his shoulders and he went out to work. Came to the gate, 20 men, 2 soldiers, they are marching out. They used to stop under a bunch of trees to have a rest always. So he took off the bag with his daughter and left her behind a tree, and he went off to work. But he looked back and he saw a man came, as arranged, grabbed the bag and ran off. We got a message. The goods have arrived. The child was safe. Yes, the child was safe, but I fell into a deep depression. The only depression in my life that I remember. I was thinking how that child, the poor child, woke up amongst strangers that she has never seen, speaking a language she doesn't understand. They speak Lithuanian, she speaks Yiddish. I couldn't forget it. I went to school, I worked, but my heart was compressed. I felt so terrible for a long while. But 3 months later, I can't remember exactly the dates, suddenly, when all the adults were out working and I was at school teaching the kids, German trucks came in with soldiers and they went hunting for children. The so-called Kinderaktion. They went into every house and they grabbed kids, from babies from mother's arms to children up to the age of about 11. We told the kids in our school, we said, "Run away, hide, we don't know what's going on, they are looking for kids, hide, we can't protect you." So the kids scattered, and they went door to door, basement to basement, loft to loft. They pulled kids out of cupboards, under beds. Some mothers went with their babies. A baby refused to give up a baby. He said, "You can go with the baby to the truck." Some grandmothers who were with the children, because the adults were working, went with the children. Over 3,000 children and some adults were taken away and murdered the same day. After that, I felt at least my little girl is alive. Here she is. my little Dalia. Her name was originally Shulamit, a Hebrew word. But this woman, the young woman, took a tremendous risk to take the child. If anybody reported, she and her mother would have been hanged, and the child, of course, killed. So she asked to call her Dalia. She didn't want a Jewish name. Dalia in Lithuanian means fate, the child of fate. And Dalia is what we call her even now. Very brave woman, took a great chance. We honor her because thanks to her my cousin survived the war. We have written her name into the honorable list of people who have saved Jewish children and adults at Yad Vashem in Israel, the Holocaust Museum of Israel. There is a whole alley with trees, and every tree has a name of a rescuer. Her name is there. After 3 years, when we came out from the basement, we went to a train. And the train took us from Kovno, across Poland and Germany here, to Dachau, to Munich, near Munich. On the way we stopped here, somewhere by the Polish border, and there was another concentration camp there, Stutthof. And that is where everybody was driven out of the train. We were packed, 200 people in a wagon, I think it was. It was so crowded, there was no water, no food, no facilities. And we were on top of each other, we couldn't even sit or lie down. We arrived there, opened the gates of the wagons, everybody roused, get out, push out the dead bodies, because we had dead people amongst us already. Push out the dead bodies before you leave the train. 5 minutes later, they separated the men from the women. I didn't have time to say goodbye to my mother. My mother, my aunt remained standing there, father and I back on the train, and the train took off and traveled the whole day and the night, and we arrived eventually to a big open field. We were marched off, we had no water, we were dry, we were parched. And we saw this big open place with 2 rows of barbed wire and machine gun posts in the corner. And we were greeted, and funny huts half buried in the ground. We were greeted by a vicious commandant. A commandant is the top in a concentration camp, the top officer. He was vicious. He insulted us, he screamed at us. They took away our clothes, they shaved our heads, they took away our luggage, we never saw it again. We were given striped uniforms and one blanket. And he was screaming, lazy Jews, now you are going to learn how to work. There were other indignities performed on us. People had money with them. When they saw that they are taking everything away from us, they went to a toilet, which was a ramp over a ditch. And they threw the money and the valuables, whatever they had, they threw it in there, not to give it to the Nazis. They found out that this is what they were doing. So they took 10 of our men and they told them to undress and walk in there and with their bare hands fish out all the money, everything that is there, the paper money and so on. Take it out and wash it clean and lay it out on the grass to dry, and then they put a fire around it. One of the men who had to do that was the head of our ghetto, Dr. Elkes. An elder man, a very respected man in the community, Dr. Elkes. He wrote a letter to his son in England, and we have that letter. His son survived and showed the letter to the community, where he told him what he has been through. Not in Dachau, before in the ghetto, he wrote a letter and he sent it out secretly. It was hidden during the war and passed on after the war. Dr. Elkes was one of the men in the ditch. He came back to the barrack. He was in my barrack. And he said, I've had enough. I think he committed suicide, but he died next day. These huts, we looked at it, we saw the name, Dachau, concentration camp Dachau, camp number 1. Dachau? We knew the name Dachau. It's famous. Hitler established Dachau in 1933. Excuse me. To lock up all his political opponents. He locked up communists and socialists, labor leaders, publishers of newspapers, writers, professors from university, people from the church, anybody who was against Hitler politically, and a lot of Jews. A concentration camp is essentially a jail, but it's a jail for people who have done nothing wrong except politically they are not acceptable to the government. The first concentration camps, by the way, were built by the British in South Africa for the Boers in the Boer War. But they didn't have to teach the Germany how to do it. And we were now in Dachau. But when we looked at this miserable camp, we thought, this can't be Dachau. It looks so miserable, so simple. We imagined something much more fancy. We were right. This was not the main camp of Dachau. The main camp came later. We walked into those barracks. 25 men slept on each side on these hard boards. There were no mattresses, there was no straws, there was nothing. All we had was our uniform and one blanket. 25 men on each side, a little iron stove in the middle, and one little window at the back. When it rained, this was below ground level, so water used to run into the barrack and we were walking up to our knuckles in water. And I spent 10 months in that kind of a barrack. 10 months of slave labor, 12-hour shifts, building, construction, total hunger, full of lice, because they gave us no washing facilities. We had taps outside, in winter they froze. We had no place to wash. I wore the same uniform for 10 months, and I was full of lice that were crawling and drinking our blood and bringing us disease. And then we started to die after a few months. After about 5 or 6 months of not eating anything, we used to get a bowl of soup, watery vegetable soup, sometimes a piece of horse meat in there, and a piece of bread, one slice of bread. And in the morning, we got a black water called coffee without sugar. Every second day, we used to get a square inch of margarine or cheese. That's it. You can't live on that and work 12-hour shifts. But the body is an amazing structure. The body uses up, when it needs energy, it uses up fat. That is why we get fat. For a day when we won't be able to eat, when we won't have anything to eat. And when the fat is used up, the body starts to use up the muscles, because the body has to have energy. The heart needs energy, the brain needs energy, and that energy and working needs energy. And that energy comes straight out of the body. So after 10 months there, those who survived, I weighed 70 pounds, my father weighed 65. And the diseases that came with it. And then people die. After you really run out of energy, then you start dying left and right. Every day, 4 or 5 people in the barrack dead. I carried more dead bodies than I could count. And we worked. In the morning, I just want to tell you that this is a description of concentration camp life that I'm giving you. But here is our friend in Canada who says it wasn't like that. Monica Schaefer said, while there were detention camps where prisoners were kept against their will, these were work camps. The prisoners were kept as healthy and as well fed as possible in those terrible war years. Thank you, Monica, for telling us what it was like. Germany had a problem. Germany was being bombed day and night. And they had fighter planes that rose up and tried to shoot down the American and British bombers. These bombers came in daytime. The Boeing 17 Superfortress, American. A huge aeroplane used to drop 1-ton bombs. A 1-ton bomb destroyed a whole quarter of a city sometimes. A whole block of a city. They have machine guns on top and behind and the back. They can defend themselves from fighter planes. At night, we used to hear those Avro Lancaster bombers. There is one in Hamilton still in the museum now. You can go and see it. Huge aeroplanes, the size of those wings, you can't imagine. They carried tons of bombs, dropping them at night, destroying cities, railways, factories, everything. Germany invented the first jet fighter plane. The first jet aeroplane was invented in Germany, Messerschmitt 262. I'm a pilot, so I'm a bit interested, so forgive me if I'm boring you with this stuff. And that aeroplane could fly 900 kilometers an hour, when the best the American, the British were flying is 360. The bombers are slow anyway. He could fly up to a bomber and shoot him down before they could shoot him down, because he was so fast. And we saw them flying over the sky. When you heard that jet, very specific scream of a noise, if you looked where you heard it, you didn't see him. We learned, if we heard him there, to look here, because he was across the sky in a fraction of a second. That was a very dangerous aeroplane for the Allies. And Hitler asked to have them built more. At first he didn't believe it, but then he believed when he saw what they were doing. They were shooting down airplanes. So he asked, I think, for 20,000 planes, so he could wipe the skies of the British and American Air Force. But they couldn't build them because they were being bombed. So an architect in Berlin designed an idea to build a factory that was bomb-proof. Like that. They filled a mountain of sand, they piled up sand in a round shape, 400 meters long, almost half a kilometer. Then they covered it with steel and concrete, 5 meters thick. 5 meters is from the floor to the ceiling here. And then they dug out the sand and put in 4 floors of machine tools. A giant factory. You have never seen a building that size. Here is another picture of it, an actual picture. Here is a soldier standing. Here is a prisoner. You see the size of it. This is the end, but they started to dig out the sand. Here's another picture. This is 5 meters of steel erected, metal, that will all be filled with concrete. No bomb of the Second World War could go through that. And the idea was to start building an airplane in the front and a complete plane would come out in the end. Mass production. That was the idea. We never finished it. I never contributed to the German war effort, but I helped to build this and we all died trying. Here is a board. The prisoner had to stand on the board and a large pipe was hanging from a crane feeding ready mixed cement, and they had to spread it around. But the wind would suddenly blow the pipe sideways. The prisoner would fall off the narrow board. In winter it was slippery and icy, and fall into the concrete and drown in the concrete, and the concrete hardened around his body and locked him up forever. I got a good job. They said, we need mechanics, tool makers. I picked up my hand. I'm a metal worker. They put me in a big building which had 4 pumps, giant pumps, and there were 3 such buildings, one next to the other. 12 pumps to pump cement to the building site through pipes, large pipes, metal pipes. 150 horsepower motor, a major machine. I had to look after one machine. I had to keep it going. When it's going, I hold the clutch. But if I feel a rock has jammed up the piston, I have to switch off, open the machine, pour out all the concrete from there, clean it up, replace the ring on the piston and put it all together again. Fast, fast, schnell, schnell, hurry up. That was my job. I didn't have to work outside. I got my father to work in my workshop, so he shouldn't work because he would have died there in the first 2 months. But I lost my friend in the concrete. Every 5 years, Dachau concentration camp, which still exists now as a place of memory, you can visit it. Every 5 years, they invite me and my wife to come and visit, to celebrate 65 years after liberation. That was 7 years ago, 8 years ago. So we went. They were very nice to us. They put us up in hotels. They sent us tickets, a big celebration. The president of Germany came to speak. Another time the prime minister came. Very nice. I said, I want to visit that site. They said to me, you can't go there. It's a German Air Force base. I said, I don't care. I built it, I want to see it. Get an officer to take me in. They don't like to argue too much with Holocaust survivors, you know. So they got an officer, and Lieutenant Colonel Rolacek came out and shook my hand. I'm an engineer. I said, what do you do? I said, I'm an engineer, jets. I said, I'm also an engineer, electronics. Oh, very nice. Come, we are colleagues, let's go. Took me and my wife, and he took us in there with his pass, and he showed us around this giant building inside. From outside you can see nothing. A forest grows over it. He showed us around. The Americans used to store, I don't know if atomic rockets or regular rockets, but those big rockets were stored inside there at one time. I didn't see it. That was before I came. That was 1965 and 1975. No, what matter? I'm sorry. 2000, now it's 2008 and 2015. In 2010 was 65 years after liberation. That's when I was there. So we walk around, and I said to him, could you kindly take me to the wall? I would like to touch the wall from inside. He says, why do you want to do that? I said, my friend is buried in the concrete. Oh, he says, not only your friend, 12 people are buried in the concrete. How do you know that? I was amazed that he knows anything about it. Oh, he says, I'm very interested in the history. I know the pump you worked on. I told him about the pump. I know which pump it is. Please send me a picture. He never did. He says, 12 people are buried. I said, how do you know? He says, because I read the diary of the chief engineer. He says 12 people are buried in the concrete. This building is so strong, I'll tell you. It'll outlive the pyramids. When the world is melting in 1 million years because the sun gets too hot for us, this will be the last thing to go. So he takes me to the wall, and here I am saying goodbye to my friend. Two years ago was 70 years after liberation. 2015, 3 years ago. We are getting another invitation. Mr. Gotz, please come with your wife if you want. So we go again. And there is my friend Rolacek, Lieutenant Colonel. Hello, Elly, very nice, we are friends. Who wants to go and see the bunker? He calls it the bunker. So sure, picks up 15 people, puts us in a bus, and he takes us there, shows us around. And then he says, would anybody like to see the wall? And people said, what do you mean? What wall? And I said, yes, yes, I want to go to the wall. Okay, he says, come. And he smiles. And he takes me there. He's got lights there in that place. And he's got a sculptor made hands of concrete sticking out of the wall, like there are people behind. And the fingers are painted gold, and they are holding flowers. Oh, my wife looked at it. She said, what a terrible idea, what it looks like. I can't look at it. She was very upset. But I thanked him. I said, that's wonderful. You've done the only memorial to 12 people who are buried in the concrete. I think it's wonderful, and he was very pleased that I appreciated what he did. Well, we stayed 10 months in those barracks. All kinds of things happened. I haven't got time to tell you all. I became very sick. I became very sick with spotted typhus, fleck fever. It comes from the lice. 3 days I lay in very high fever, totally unconscious. Most people who got the disease used to lie 2 or 3 days unconscious, and then either you wake up or you wake up dead. I woke up. My father came to visit me, and I said to him, I'm so hungry, I would like an apple. I was lying in the hospital barrack, so-called. I must have been delirious. Where do you find an apple in Dachau? But my father went to the kitchen window where he knew there was a woman from my school who knew me. She was working in the kitchen, there were a few women. And he told her what I said. And she gave him 3 little green apples, and he brought it to me. I said, have one. No, he wouldn't have one. I must eat all 3. He was so afraid that I was already dead. 3 days he saw me not reacting, lying there. I ate all 3. They tasted very good. When I woke up, I was so weak. I weighed 70 pounds. The doctor, who was the boss of my mother, the surgeon, chief surgeon, had his own hospital in Lithuania. He knew my mother. He worked with her in the ghetto all the time. She was his assistant in operations. He was now the head of the doctor of the department, of the barrack. So he said to me, Elly, don't go to work. Stay here. You'll work in the hospital. Clean up, help the patients. Every 2 weeks used to come a doctor from the SS. Everybody had to go out naked outside the hospital, summer or winter, and he looked at each one and he said, this one go to the trucks, this one you can go back. Anybody with swollen legs, anybody with a wound that looked not healing, which there were many that looked already too thin, on the truck. They were taken to Auschwitz and gassed. One day my father is standing in the line. He became sick. He was in the hospital. And I was working there. And I see the doctor has arrived. Everybody standing outside naked, waiting to go past the doctor, round the corner. The doctor is over there, and there's another corner of the building. And I see what's happening. They are taking people away. And my father is in line, and I can see he's a candidate. So I jumped into the toilet, and I'm shouting to him, come here, come here. And he looks, he says, no, he says, I want to go past and then I'll come. I said, no, come now. And behind him is standing my uncle. He says, Julius, he's calling you, go and see what he wants. I pull him into the toilet. I said, do you know what's going on? They are taking them away. There is a truck that they've already put 6 people on. You want to go there? I don't know where they are taking them, but it's not good. I said, sit down in the toilet and stay here. 15 minutes later, the thing was over, the truck was gone, my father survived. Saved his life just by dragging him into the toilet. Now I'm working in the hospital. One day, a new commandant. We used to get a new commandant every 2 months, 3 months, or less. Sometimes 2 weeks later, there was another guy. And each one of them was a character of his own. One of them was a village musician, so he liked to have music, so he made a concert in the middle of Dachau. That was an amazing story too, actually. He said, how many of you, in the morning we were counted on the appel, how many of you are musicians? People are afraid to say, okay, come out everybody, what do you play, what do you play? Come, we are going to have a concert. We can't play, we are so weak, we are hungry. Oh, no problem. Kitchen, give them as much soup as they want. They started to eat. He brought them instruments, and he started to practice for a concert in the middle of Dachau concentration camp. In the summer of 1944, he asked them, what should we start? Anyway, he set it up. One morning on a Sunday, a concert. He invited his officers, their girlfriends, their wives, people from the town nearby, from Landsberg am Lech, come for a concert in the concentration camp. They laid out boards over the mud, because we always stood in mud there, and chairs, and people arrived. Men in suits with ties, Sunday after church, women in white dresses with hats. What a sight. And I wasn't working that Sunday. Every second Sunday we had off, I was in camp. Everybody stand at ease. The guests are coming. And he ran around like a mother at a wedding. He was so excited. And he seated everybody, and then he called the orchestra, and he said, play Kol Nidre. Now, Kol Nidre is the holiest song in the Jewish repertoire in the synagogue on Yom Kippur. That is a song which says, forgive us, God, for all the promises we have made, that they should be for naught, because they agreed to convert to Christianity under the Inquisition, under Spanish, the problems. So they said, we are Christians now, but they had a song created, forgive us for the promises we made, but they are for naught. So this is what they played, and we were standing there crying, such a wonderful theme. We play it now in the synagogue every Yom Kippur. It's for cello, it's a beautiful concert. It was written, by the way, not by a Jew, it was written by a Swiss composer. Then he said, okay, now we are playing. He gave them a chance to play a Jewish melody. And then he said, now we are going to play Franz Lehár. We had operetta, and then we had a little bit of Mozart, and we had a quartet. Beautiful music. At the end of the music, the guests didn't know what to do. Should they clap, or should they just get up? Because these are Jews, these are prisoners. They clapped, but very gently. And they got up and they walked out and they closed the gate, and everybody back to wherever. Then we got another commandant after that one. He comes into the camp when everybody's gone to work and the people are sleeping, who are night shifts are sleeping, and he hears music. So he follows his ear and he walks into a barrack and he opens the door, and there are musicians playing music. He said, what are you doing? They all jumped up. Achtung, take off your hat. You had to have a hat. If you didn't have a hat, you got beaten up. Achtung, attention. What are you doing? We are practicing, sir. Practicing for what? We don't know, sir. The previous commandant told us to practice every day, so we are practicing. Out of here, lazy Jews. Kicked everybody in the bum, smashed up the instruments. He was not interested in music. Finally, we got a commandant who walks in the hospital. When I was already working there, I want to inspect the hospital. The doctor takes him around. Where is the operating room? We haven't got one. What do you mean you haven't got a hospital? Got to have. I'm a medical student, I know. Doctor, he says, my doctor says, look, Mr. Commandant, we haven't got the equipment. We have no equipment. And to me he said, what does he want me to operate on? Those half-alive prisoners? It's ridiculous. And the guy says, give me a list of what you want. So the doctor gave him a list as long as his arm to get rid of him. 2 weeks later, 2 huge crates arrived. Everything he asked and more. The doctor said to me, Elly, build an operating room. Where? He says, take that cupboard there, that big storage room, clean out everything and build a bed. You know what it looks like. You've seen your mother where she worked. Yes, I know. So I built a bed from wood crates covered with blankets, and I laid out the instruments. We had everything. We even had a blood transfusion instrument there, a Beck, I remember. Commandant comes in every morning. Any operations today? No, not today. Okay, let me know. I want to watch. Okay. every morning. And the doctor says to me, he wants operations. Ridiculous. But one day he gets a patient, he's got an appendix attack. The doctor examines him, he says, this guy's going to die if I don't operate. Okay, we are having an operation. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, officer. Officer came there, and now the doctor says to me, Elly, you are going to be my assistant at the operation. Doctor, I said, I know nothing about it. I'm a mechanic. What do I know about medicine? Why don't you ask Dr. Berman? Dr. Berman, he says, he's an internist. They know nothing. Excuse me, I didn't know that surgeons hate internists. He says, you'll do it, no problem. He says, your mother knew and you'll know. I get it by the DNA, I suppose. I said, doctor, you'll have to tell me what to do. He said, of course I'll tell you, don't worry, it's very simple. Operations are simple. Okay. So I prepared everything what he told me. He said, boil the gloves. We haven't got a blood cleaner, whatever. Boil the gloves in water. So I threw the gloves in the water. 2 pairs, he says, for you and for me. Okay, I'm going to wear gloves in the operation. Anyway, I boiled the gloves, and in the morning everything is ready. I got up early, I fixed up all the instruments, laid out the way he told me, 1, 2, 3, the knives, the things, the scalpels. The commandant is standing there with his hands behind his back, and my professor, because he was a professor at university teaching surgery, he's got an audience, he's going to give a lecture. Okay, scalpel number 1. I hand him the scalpel. Oh, before that, he comes in, gloves. I pull them out with a tweezer. He says, they are full of water, how can I put them on? I said, I was also wondering. He says, you should have tied them up so no water should come inside. You didn't tell me. I was scared of him. He was such a big man and a very strong. Okay, he says, pull them on me. Pull them on me. So I pulled them on him, and then he pulled on my gloves with the water inside. It wasn't feeling good, but we squeezed it out. And we go into the operation, dressed with a gown, and he gives the instruction. Okay, scalpel number 1. First of all, I have to give him an injection. The doctor injected him and put him to sleep. And then the scalpel number 1, and we are cutting the epidermis, and he's explaining to the commandant, the epidermis here, clamp number 1, not this one, the other one, okay. Clamp number 1, clamp number 2, clamp number 3, lay them all out, open. Now he says I would have to cut the fat, but there is no fat, because this prisoner weighs nothing. So all I have to do is cut the internal skin of the stomach, which is very thin, though we have to be careful. The little clamp, the one, there's that one over there, yeah. Oh, cha. And everything pops out. I'm not putting you off, am I? And all the insides. And the doctor sticks his hand in there and pokes around and pulls out, he says, and here is the appendix, all green and yellow, you see, because it's infected. So now we tie it around and we cut it off, and now we push it all back. Needle number 2. Number 2, I give number 3, not this one. Number 3, okay, number 2 needle. Ta. With those fat fingers, he works so fast, it's amazing to see. Choo, sewed them all up, cleaned him up, put on iodine, fine, done. That guy survived. And we had a second operation, which I also attended, and that was a much more complicated one, but I won't give you the details. It was complicated. But the doctor made it, and the guy would have survived, but he died of hunger. 10 months. And in the end, the American army is coming close. We know they are there, we hear the guns. Very soon, either we will be free or they'll kill us. And the lost commandant, a vicious man, he had no other name for us but assholes, excuse me. In German it sounds even worse. Right? Arschlöcher. We called him the same. We compensated them. You guys think you look happy here today. You think you are going to survive the war and be free, right? Forget it. We are keeping the last bullet for you, no matter how the war ends, because he knew they've lost the war, and he was very upset about it. He was a vicious man, or a terrible man. He was hanged after the war for the crimes that he did. And I attended his grave now. When I go there, this same friend of mine, the lieutenant colonel. He said, "You want to see the grave of your last commandant?" He showed me where they are all buried, the 27 of them. And then he also showed me, and that's where Hitler sat in his cabinet when he wrote Mein Kampf. He was in jail right there by Landsberg. We knew that they are going to kill us if they can. We took his word for it. But suddenly, they stopped work, and they picked us all up, and they brought us to Central Camp Dachau, the granddaddy of all concentration camps. Here we are, 2 rows of barbed wire, charged with 2,000 volts electricity. You touch it, you die. You want to commit suicide? Just run and get that. Except that guy in the machine gun posts where this photograph is taken from, if he doesn't get you first with his machine gun. Not one man ever escaped from Dachau in the 12 years that it existed, from 1933 to 1945. And there was water here, just in case you got through the wire. Good luck getting through a wire. 32 barracks, big barracks, was supposed to hold originally 500 men in 2 bunks. Now it was supposed to be 1,000 men because there were 4 banks, 1, 2, 3, 4, like shelves. And it was packed with prisoners, dead and living, thin people, shoulder to shoulder they were lying on the shelf. 2,000 people in a barrack, I don't know how many. There were liberated about 40,000 people there, a massive number of people. And my father and I, we come in here, and they drive us in here to the second barrack, and my father has to lie down. He's very close to death. I'm going to lose my father now. His legs are swollen, his eyes are not focused. I know he's in the last legs, and he wants to lie down, and there's no place. And finally they grab an old dead body from the bottom bunk, so he grabs it and he crawls in there. And I'm thinking, I don't know where my mother is, and the war is nearly ended, and he's going to die right now. I fell down on the floor next to him and I slept. In the morning, he's still talking to me. Noontime, the soup arrives. You've got to get up and stand in line. He can't get up. Many prisoners are lying there. They don't care about food anymore. They are finished. He gives me his dish. You get it for me. So I go in line and I try to explain that this is for me and this is for him. Okay, they'll give me another soup and another slice of bread. I go back to my father. He grabs the soup. And people are screaming, "The Americans are here, we are free." I said, "Father, it's over, we've made it. The war is over for us." "Oh," he says, "that's good. Have you got the bread?" That was my moment of liberation. Have you got the bread? I was afraid he was still going to die. Here are the prisoners came out after liberation there to greet the Americans. I wasn't there. I was sitting with my father. I was afraid he's going to die now, after liberation. But an hour later, he crawled out from the bunk and he stood in front of me and he said, "So now what?" He survived. My father lived to 84. He saw grandchildren. Thank you for this first part. I'll take any questions. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone? Anything?
Reunite with your mother?
When did my father unite with my mother? 3 months after the end of the war. We were in a hospital, and one day we got a list of women who were liberated in the north near Bremen. We were in the south, and there was the name of my mother and my aunt. And we found them and we brought them to us.
Are you angry at what happened?
I was, and I will talk about it. I'll talk about it. I was very angry. I was ready for killing Germans. I'll tell you what I felt. I was in hospital. I couldn't lift an arm or a leg. As I told you, my father weighed 65 pounds. Can you imagine? I weighed 70. We slowly gained strength, but not muscles. So I started to exercise on a bar, lift myself. I couldn't even walk down the stairs. But my thoughts were, I'm going to kill Germans. I'm going to get revenge. That guy standing there, he could have been a guard in Dachau. I'm going to kill him when I'm stronger. That is what I walked around with. Full of hate and nothing else. I wasn't thinking about anything else except I want to kill people. 3 months later, we found my mother. I was so relieved. It was so wonderful. She survived. She came back. She didn't look so great, but she was my mother, and I was so happy to have her. And then I kept quiet. I didn't tell anybody that both my parents survived because I was embarrassed about it. Because so many people had no one left in the world. But my thoughts, I'm going to get revenge. And I went around with it for some while. Now, we were treated very well by the United Nations. We were given food, later we were given a place to live, a camp. We were given clothes, second-hand clothes, but we got clothes. And one day, I thought to myself, what are you thinking? You are accusing a whole nation of Germans of being murderers? That's ridiculous. That's what they did to us, that we are all bad people, Jews. Yes, they followed Hitler, many of them. Yes, they were persuaded by him that it was okay, but they were not murderers, they didn't kill anybody, they didn't touch, many people didn't do anything. Don't do what they did to you. Stop hating, because it's totally unproductive. What are you going to do with your life, I said to myself. And I remembered, I want to be an engineer, and I haven't got high school. So I said to myself, you've got to stop thinking about hate, because hate destroys you. It's amazing. I'm amazed to this day that I understood that. And now I want to give you something you should remember for the rest of your life. To hate is like taking poison and hoping that the other would die. You know who said it? Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, 2,700 years ago, he wrote, to hate is like taking poison and hoping the other would die. I freed myself from hate by force of will. It was hard. Every time I used to start thinking about it, I used to push my head. Don't think about it. Think about something else. They never sent psychologists to ask us how we are. Nobody helped me. But I decided myself I'm not going to hate. And once I stopped hating, I started to live. I'll tell you how I lived. Any questions or discussion?
Do you feel as though enough has been done to remember the lessons of the Holocaust?
Do I remember?
Do you feel as though enough has been done to teach the lessons?
Do I think enough has been done to remember the lessons of the Holocaust? Well, I'm doing my best. I speak to 16,000 students a year, universities and high schools. I'm trying. Many of us are trying. We have a whole group of survivors who are doing the same. As for the hope for remembering, when I think that we have got all these good advisors, the Holocaust deniers, I'm worried. But I believe we left enough of a literature that the world will remember. But the world hasn't learned, because we killed people in Rwanda, because we killed people in Africa, because we killed people in Asia. Human beings can do the highest and the best, and they can do the worst and the ugliest. We are capable of the worst as well as the best, and we have to remember it.
Do you attribute your survival through luck, or do you think it was more by who you knew and how you got to work in the hospital? Do you think that was really the success to you surviving, or do you think it was just luck?
Was it luck? Was it what you did? Was it work? It's a combination. The fact that I had a trade saved my life in Dachau, no question. The fact that I wanted to live helped, because if anyone was pessimistic enough to say, I don't want it anymore, they died very quickly. Very quickly. I don't know. Survivor is not a trade or a profession. Survivor is a fact. So I don't call myself a survivor, I call myself an engineer. But it requires a desire to live, which every human being has, no matter how badly off they are. There is a drive to live unless you give it up. And there is a moment when you give up. And the moment you give up, within a day or two you are dead. Willpower is a big issue. Thank you. It's a good question. Okay, so what? Yes?
How did you leave Germany after the war ended?
I'll come to that in a moment.
How did your experiences affect your relationship to Judaism?
Your relationship to whom?
Judaism. You're Jewish.
To Judaism. I'm an atheist, but I'm a Jewish atheist. I love my people. I do what I can for them, and I would try to defend them if I had to. I do not believe that I was saved by some deity or by God, but I go to synagogue to be with my people. It even got so far that I became the president of my synagogue, which was a big surprise. In fact, my mother-in-law said, "You, a president of a synagogue? The town will burn down." I know about Jews, I know Jewish geography, I love Israel, I like to go there, and I like to read Jewish writers as well as others. I am not a discriminator in literature. One more.
Did you ever get to see Dahlia again?
Did I get to see Dahlia? I was waiting for that question. Here she is with me after the war. My aunt and my mother survived. My mother was on a barge to be drowned in the sea with 3,000 women from the camp of Stutthof at the end. There came an order from Hitler, there were many barges with prisoners and many were drowned. They were being dragged through the sea out of Bremen, out of the canal, Bremen Canal, and they were going to be drowned. It was very close to the end of the war, and a British aeroplane was flying very low, and they started to shoot at him from an anti-aircraft gun, which was on the barge. The aeroplane turned around, came back and dropped a bomb on the barge, killed hundreds of women on the deck. They were starving, they didn't have water, they were drinking seawater. My mother got a piece of steel 4 inches big in her stomach. She was lying unconscious and bleeding on the deck. My aunt was sitting next to her. She lost some fingers. And at that moment, and the barge was sinking now because part of it was broken open. And at that moment, a German Navy hospital ship pulled up and they announced through loudhailers, "Women, the war is over." 5th of May. I think 5th of May was the end of the war? I think so. 7th of May. The war is over. You've got to get off the barge because it's sinking. And they lowered nets, and German sailors were running up and down the barge, yelling at the women, "Come, you can get up, go to the net." They came to my aunt, they said, "You come with us, she's dead." "No," said she said, "my mother was unconscious." Said, "She's not dead, she's wounded. You have to help her." 2 German sailors grabbed my mother, threw her like a sack of potatoes, as my aunt described it, up into the net, up on the ship, and it was a hospital ship, German Navy. Put her straight into the operating room, and a German naval surgeon saved my mother's life. My mother lived till 92. She died here in Toronto. My little cousin. When we found the 2 women 3 months after the end of the war, my aunt recovered enough to go through 3 borders illegally, to go to Lithuania from Germany. We were sitting in Bavaria, and picked up her little girl and brought her here. And the brave woman who saved her was not there. The Russians arrested her and they tortured her, and she was in jail because she wrote a letter to the United Nations that under the Atlantic Charter between Churchill and Stalin, Lithuania should not be occupied by Russia again. They opened the letter, they arrested everybody who signed the letter. She ended up in a jail, she was tortured, and she was killed there. So when my aunt came, only the grandmother was with the child, and she was so glad that she came to take her, because she said, "No, I can't look after her, I'm running to my daughter every day with food." It was a terrible situation. And this little girl said, "You are not my mother. The one is my mother. Where's my mother?" The other one, she was crying, she didn't want to go with her. But she took her and brought her back secretly through 3 borders to Germany, and here I am with her together. She only spoke Lithuanian, and she didn't know who I was and why I'm hugging her. And here we are together in Norway. 2 years ago when I was there, I took 30 university students to Poland, and I stopped on the way back, and here I am with her. And today, she arrived 3 days ago in Toronto, and yesterday we had a party, my 90th birthday and our 60th wedding anniversary, and she was there. And she told her story. That's Dalia. What else happened? Well, here's my mother after the war. She was a very beautiful woman before the war. She didn't look well when we got her back, but later she recovered and she was full of energy. She learned English when we came to Africa later. I'll tell you in a moment how. She acted in theater. She created a factory for women's dresses, and she was a wonderful mother to my children, a grandmother to my children. Died at 92, almost fully conscious, not quite. My father died at 68. He was a good man. He studied, he liked to read a lot. When he died, he left me with a whole new library, two roomfuls of books he collected. He wanted to understand, how is it possible that this should happen in the middle of Europe, this genocide? He never got a clear answer. He learned English so he could read Churchill's books, the 5 volumes. He read them with difficulty and with a dictionary, but he read them. He was a good man, loved mathematics, tried to teach my son a little mathematics, used to collect puzzles for him, a lot of reading, good father. What happened to me? After I came out from hospital, I told you I was full of hate, but when I got rid of hate, it took me a while, I remembered, I want to be an engineer and I haven't got high school. So I hit the books. I started to study mathematics, higher mathematics, calculus, differential calculus, everything I needed. It was difficult. So I found a German professor to come to him in the evening and to teach me what I need. And I paid him and later another teacher, I paid them with my rations. I used to get chocolate, cigarettes and coffee with a box of food, other foods, from the United Nations. Now, I didn't smoke and I didn't like coffee, but chocolate, I love chocolate. I love chocolate. She knows. I gave it away for lessons. And I also took a course in electronics. I was fascinated by radios, so I took a course how to repair radios, and I became a radio technician. And I thought, hey, that will be fun. I want to be an electronic engineer, not a mechanical engineer as I thought before. After 2 years, I applied to the university in Munich to be tested, to be accepted at the university, because I haven't got papers. They got 5 professors together for a number of us who had the same problem. Half-an-hour exam, oral exam, very quickly. As soon as I start to write on the board, quadratic equation, a squared plus b squared plus c. Okay, next. What about this? What about that? What about trigonometry? What about that? What about differential calculus? Half an hour, they found out everything I know and what I don't know. They accepted me at the University of Munich, and I came home and I said, Mother, I'm finally going to university. You are not going, she says. Why not? Because we are leaving Germany. I said, where are we going? Nobody wants us. You see, we had relatives in Johannesburg, South Africa, quite wealthy people. They wanted to bring us out. South Africa said, no Jews, no Catholics. We were in good company. Canada was closed. Canada took 1,000 Jewish orphans, and then they said, enough is enough. There was one guy who said, for Jews, none is too many. There is a book called None is Too Many. Look it up. Interesting book by a Canadian about this issue. America was closed. They didn't even fulfill their own quota system. It's a complicated story. Australia was closed. Nobody wanted Jews. 150,000 Jews were sitting in Germany and had no place to go. Only when Israel was established in 1948 did 150,000 Jews get up and go to Israel and empty the camps. But we got out earlier. My mother said, we are going to Norway. I said, Norway? Where is Norway? What is Norway? She said, they said they'll take 900 Jews because they lost 900 Jews to the Nazis, to the Auschwitz. We got up and we went to Norway. They sent a ship for us. They were wonderful to us. They brought us a ship. They took us to East. They had a place on the east coast of Norway, by the fjord, a beautiful place. They put us up sort of long big barracks, but it was nice and clean. They gave us bed sheets. They gave us toothbrushes. They gave us pocket money. They taught us Norwegian. They made a class. Students came to teach us. I joined the class. I couldn't stand it. Adults are slow learners. It drove me crazy. I went on my own. After I speak 5 languages, the 6th one is easy. So I learned Norwegian in 3 months. I started to read the paper every day with the dictionary, and I grabbed every Norwegian I could. Come and talk to me for 5 minutes. 3 months later, I could speak Norwegian. I was the first one to get a job. I went to Oslo, and I got a job as a radio repairman. At night, I went to night school. I want to get matric in Norway. They don't recognize my German approval. My father writes to his uncle in South Africa, please send some money. My son wants to be an engineer. He shouldn't have to work. He should study full time. And the uncle writes back, I'm not allowed to send out money. But now I can get you into Africa. And if you come to Africa, I'll make sure your son can go to university. We went to Africa. Not through Southern Africa. They wouldn't take us South Africa. He put us in Rhodesia, which is now called Zimbabwe. It was a British colony. Now I had to learn English. Just learned Norwegian. Now I need English. I got myself into grade 12 for 9 months. 0 English to start. They don't want to take me. He doesn't understand a word. How can we put him in a class? Please let him in. I had a translator. Please tell them to let me. I'll sit in the back. I won't bother anybody. Okay, let's try. But as long as he is quiet and he doesn't bother, okay. I'm in class. 9 months later, I passed matric. I got a good mark in English. And I learned how to love Shakespearean sonnets. To this day, I love them. It was quite funny, actually. In the class, every Friday, poetry. And the boys, it was a boys' school, they hated poetry. They hated it. And I didn't mind at all. I want poetry. I want to feel the language. I want to hear. Every Friday, a boy has to read a poem. Never asked me. Didn't want to embarrass me. One day, a boy is reading, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Shakespeare, sonnet. And he's reading it so badly, he's chopping it like wood. And suddenly I realized the beauty of those words. I said, sir, he's killing the poem. And the whole class tells me, Gotz, you read it. Yes, I will. The whole class was lying on the floor laughing how I was reading the poem. Even the teacher cracked a smile, a nice Paka Englishman. But he said, he's right, you were killing the poem. I learned English. I went to university in Johannesburg, South Africa. 4 years later, I graduated as an electronics engineer. Hooray, I got my first step. My father was proud of me. I went back to Rhodesia and I expected to get a good job because now I'm an engineer and they were not making a living, they were struggling, they were newcomers, their English wasn't very good. Mine was okay, I was speaking with my accent. You all understand me, don't you? Yeah. And I couldn't get a job. Rhodesia had nothing, there was no industry, only agriculture. What should I have done? You tell me, what would you do if you can't get a job as an engineer? Anybody? Huh?
Make a job. Make a job.
Start a business, guys. What's the matter with you? Canadians don't think about it. You finish university, you fold up your arms and you say to the government, get me a job. The government hasn't got jobs. They don't have a factory that makes jobs. Some of you have to start a business, have to do something to create work for others. Anyway, I started a radio workshop. I had no money. So I took a little shop and I wrote by hand radio repairs. Nothing to do with engineering, mechanic. People brought me radios, I fixed them up and I got some money, I made a bigger store, I put my parents in to sell bicycles and radios, and I started a sound recording studio to record bands, music recording. And then I started an advertising agency. It's a long story. I had a business for the black people there to give them some entertainment which they didn't have, and the advertising paid for it, so it was all free. So they loved me. I had audiences of 2,000 people sitting on the side of a mountain. I didn't provide any seats, only the screen. And then I needed films to show for the show, and I needed suitable films, and what I could get was not good except Mickey Mouse. So I started to make films. I became a filmmaker. Anyway, I was having a good time in Africa. I was fishing on the Zambezi River. This is a tiger fish. I caught it with a piece of crocodile meat. Where do you get crocodile meat? You have to shoot a crocodile. I became a hunter. I learned to shoot crocodiles. You know how you shoot crocodiles? You go at night on the water in a boat, and the crocodile is in the water fishing, and you see his eyes with the light you shine, and you see pick up the eyes, and then you go close to him and you fire with an elephant gun, a big bullet, and it stuns the crocodile but doesn't always kill him. And then you stick your hand in the water and you grab him before he sinks. And I put my hand in the water and I said, Elly Gotz, are you crazy? I pulled out a leg of a crocodile. It was a 14-foot crocodile. Threw them in the boat. Anyway, we shot about 14 crocodiles. We sold the skins. It paid for the whole trip. I climbed mountains. I learned how to ride horses. I learned how to jump horses. That was fascinating. Horses are stupid. They say they are very smart, but they are not. The horse says, yes, yes, I'm going to jump, I'm going to jump. Then he comes up, he says, no, I don't think so. And you fly by yourself over the jump. I've done it all. And one day I thought, well, it's time to get married. I have to find a woman I could love all my life. So I went looking. Well, it's a big job, you know, it took me a long time. I had a good time looking, but it took me a while. I found her. This is Esme. We have just had, yesterday, we celebrated 60 years marriage. And we are still in love. So it's wonderful. It's just wonderful. We had 3 children in South Africa, in Johannesburg. And I said, let's get out of here. This is a bad country. I don't want to live here. I love the country. I hate the politics, the separation of the races, the apartheid, the whole thing. I said, our kids will grow up racists. Our kids were not yet 5, the oldest. We had 3 of them. Tuk, tuk, tuk. We brought them all to Canada. And here we established a factory, electronic welding of plastics, with my partners, my 2 brothers-in-law. We worked very hard for a few years, but after 7 years, we were making money. So I bought an airplane. I wanted to fly, always wanted to fly. I got the airplane, I became a pilot, later I became an instrument pilot, later I was flying gliders. I flew the family to Florida and to Nova Scotia, and I flew to business all the time, New York, Chicago. We had a second factory in Chicago. We were successful. And eventually I learned gliding as well, soaring. Soaring. And now we are an old couple, and we just celebrated yesterday. That's yesterday's photograph. That's my Esme and I. And we danced and we were happy. And last year, Canada's 150th birthday. So the CBC says, who is doing something unusual? I said, I am. And I jumped from an airplane. I jumped from an airplane at 89. They didn't believe I would do it. They said, are you sure? We want to have a look at you. They said, do you look healthy enough? So I jumped. So why do I come to talk to you? Why do I do all this? I want you all to understand, how is it possible that genocide can take place in the middle of Europe? We are not talking about Africa or some other countries we don't understand. Our civilization, our top civilization, we who have invented everything that we have, how can we kill 12 million people in a war? Civilians. 6 million were Jews. We lost a third of our people. 18 million before the war. 12 million were left. And I have a theory, a very simple theory, how it works. Number one, prejudice. Personal prejudice against newcomers, against strangers, against people who are different to ourselves. Just different. We are not comfortable with people who are different to ourselves. Who look different, who pray differently, who have a different color of skin, I don't know, anything. Even if they come from Newfoundland, we make jokes about them. Don't do it. But that kind of prejudice doesn't kill thousands. That prejudice can make a pogrom, you can kill a few dozen people. To kill really on a big scale, we need two more things. We need a government that distributes weapons. In Rwanda, they distributed machetes. And they told them, go and kill the cockroaches, the others. In Germany, they distributed machine guns. The result is the same. And you need a leader. You need a politician who stands up and tells his people it's okay to kill. Those people are not worthy. Hitler was an amazing speaker. I have heard his speeches. He persuaded 3/4 of a nation to believe him. He persuaded little children to believe him. Heil Hitler. We have other leaders. We can have leaders here in Canada. You young people often don't vote. I know that because only 24% of people under 24 or something vote. Don't you care what kind of government we are going to have? The old people vote. And when you vote, you better make sure you know whom you are voting for. Because if we get bad times economic in Canada, there will for sure be one politician who will tell you the reason we have problems is because of them, because of the newcomers, because of the refugees that we have taken in. That's what they will tell you. Don't listen to such people. Economics is a complicated issue, but they are not taking away our jobs. They are making our country stronger. I'm a Jew. I know that Syria teaches the children to hate Jews. I'm paying now to bring Syrian refugees to Canada. I believe they'll learn something here. We must accept others and discover their humanity. I'm not asking you to love them. I'm asking you to be curious about them. Find out their common humanity with you. You'll be comfortable. I'll finish this picture. the First Nations of Canada, a much maligned people in a way. My grandchildren tell me that they went through whole high school and they never learned one word about the native peoples of Canada, about our First Nations. So I like to finish with that. This is an elder of the First Nations who is talking to his grandson, and he tells him, each one of us has in our chest two wolves, the wolf of love and friendship and the wolf of hatred and bitterness. So the grandson says, and they are fighting all the time. So the grandson says, which wolf will win, Grandpa? The one we feed, said the grandfather. So I say to you, don't feed the bad wolf. Thank you very much.